The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
Welcome to episode 14 of the Florida Podcasting News Show on the Florida Podcast Network. Florida Podcasting News keeps you on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.
On today's special Podcast Movement 2019 episode. By the way, we're still recovering from Podcast Movement 2019, which is why this episode was not out on the 15th, but better late than never. Oh my gosh. Anyways, so yes, on today's episode, we'll be sharing with you a bunch of interviews that we did at the conference with fellow podcasters and an exciting announcement that we're involved with ourselves. We're very excited about it. And also our thoughts on Podcast Movement itself. So listen in.
This episode is brought to you by Flintstone Media. Thanks for joining us.
This is Jaime.
And this is Glenn. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Florida Podcasting News Show. And we're back from another podcast movement here in Orlando, Florida.
Our bodies are back, but our minds and voices have yet to be found.
I got home and had to do right away, Monday morning, had to do the live show. And it had been 3 weeks for me because I had 2 weeks of vacation, 1 week at Podcast Movement. I almost forgot how to do my own show.
And please do tell the audience what special little creature gave you a special little greeting to remind you.
Oh, yes, I got stung in the butt by a wasp. Flew right up my shorts and stung me in the butt twice with the big welts.
Welcome home. Oh my gosh! But the trip was well worth it. It was a lot of fun. I almost forgot how intense Podcast Movement was because we both missed it last year when it was in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and 3,000 of our friends.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
A lot of people there.
But it's so a lot of people there, and it was a nice mixed crowd. Some people who I have known have been flirting with the idea of coming to Podcast Movement, and finally this year made it. So that was cool to see them, and a lot of people who we've seen all along. And this is only my second one. This is how many for you now?
3, I think.
3. Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be about right. But then there were some people, some friends of ours who've been around for like 5-6 years. It's amazing. And a lot of tons of new companies on the vendor floor. I mean, this industry is
How many podcast hosts are there, by the way?
I don't know. And I thought I was at least, you know what? That probably was the one moment that I felt like a grandma in the industry almost, because I was like, who are all these people encroaching in on this industry? I don't know any of these people. I don't know any of these guys. It's like the mom listening to their daughter's music. Like, I don't know any of these artists. Who are these people? That's what I felt like sometimes. There's so many new podcasting hosts. It's unreal. It's no longer just the Lipsons, the Podbeans, and the Blueberries. There was already a second tier. Now there's like a third tier of podcast hosts. There's so many out there. I was really excited. Probably some of the people that I met for the first time that I was the most excited about was when I got to meet the Buzzsprout guys. I mean, these guys aren't new. They've been around for quite some time, but they're expanding out of the nonprofit space and into other clientele. And so I got to meet Buzzsprout for the first time, and those guys are so cool.
They are.
They're local.
Yeah, they're in Jacksonville. They've been around for a long time. They sponsored in the early days of Podfest. They were a sponsor. So that's where I met them maybe 5-6 years ago in the early days of Podfest. And they're just they're a smaller company. They're pretty large compared to most, but they're a smaller company than, say, a Lipson or a Blueberry. But they're super nice and they're super helpful. And from what I hear, if you have an issue, they're right on there with the phone. You're not sent to India. They're right there on the phone with you.
Well, what I really liked about them is, you can tell.
This is not an ad for Buzzsprout.
I know it's not. Well, it's not an intentional one, but we're being paid for or anything. But what I liked about them was clearly the way that they're building their team is the likability. Because dang, everyone on their team was so likable. Liked all of them. I wanted to get a beer with all of them. They were so cool. And some little extra bells and whistles that they have, it sounds like are pretty neat. Like they're you can do that thing where you take the sound clip. There's a word for it, but the sound clip, and you can actually use it on Instagram. It's actually really cool. So anyways, stuff like that I thought was pretty innovative. Well done, Buzzsprout.
As far as overall impressions, I'm interested to hear yours. I'll give you a couple of mine and then we're going to actually get into a big announcement that was made at Podcast Movement that we're involved with. But overall impressions, I would say one is a lot more women. They said right now the podcasting space is running about 40% women. So that's a big change from when we started Podfest years ago and there were 2 women and all those guys.
A lot of that, I'm sure, is a tribute to the ladies behind She Podcasts.
Yes.
We're creating a safe space, a comfortable space for women to enter into the podcasting industry and not feel like we're being mansplained all the time.
And the other thing is, one of the other things along that line is you are not the only African-American representing podcasting.
I'm not the only piece of pepper on a table of salt anymore. No, it's true though. I mean, it's the number of people of color at this conference just was astounding. And we actually got into a little bit of a conversation about that with some friends later on. But it was really interesting to see that. I think it's because we've had people in the industry. There's a women of color Facebook group for podcasting. There's a people of color group for podcasting. And so there have been people who've become leaders now in the industry who have helped extend their hand back down and allowed other people to come into the space and feel a little bit more familiar with what's going on in here. And so, the number of people of color have just, it was very, very, and not only were there a lot of attendees, but you could tell that the conference was paying attention because there was a purposeful meetup for people of color. There was a cultural track, which had a lot of stuff in it for that. In fact, our friend Carrie Ann Reed Brown from Carry On Friends, she and a couple of girls, they did a track on the Caribbean slant of podcasting. So lots of purposeful sessions and breakouts and meetings for people of color. It was really, really exciting.
When I first got to know you at Podfest a couple of years ago, you told me that you thought podcasting was a way for people of color to get their voices heard again. As a way to finally get their voices heard. And I think that's proven correct now.
You know what? It struck me. I think that thought really solidified while I was there, because I was thinking, it used to be like music used to be what we used. And now, music is great still, blah, 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 but I'm not here to, downgrade music, but it's no longer used to like spread a message like it used to be. Just even 10, 15 years ago, it was used to really like help spread messages through communities or help expose other people to other communities through the message of music. And that's kind of fallen by the wayside. And so just like everything else in the creative space, there's podcasts to pick it back up. So we're using podcasts for messaging. It's really cool.
And the other thing we had, we can't go into too much detail, and we won't, but we actually had some meetings with some radio people, and there were a lot of radio people there. And I'll tell you what I've seen as a difference. 3 or 4 years ago, when the radio people started showing up at these conferences, they sent an underling who was told, go figure out what this podcasting thing is. We don't care. It's an intern, Let make the intern go to the podcast thing. So now, not this year. This year, we had vice presidents.
We're no longer the redheaded stepchild, guys. We're moving on up.
The execs showed up this year of all the big podcasting houses.
It's true.
And, from Westwood One to ABC
Hubbard,
to
iHeart.
They were all there. And it wasn't underlings. It was VP level.
Yes. Yes, to the point where there were special happy hours and parties and things. It was pretty high end, guys. It was pretty impressive. And some of them were speakers and stuff too.
Yeah, I sat in on that track. They had a track for radio. I sat in on several of those meetings, and because I'm interested, they are definitely trying to figure out how they can do podcasting now. But they're also finding out that podcasting's not as profitable. So they're trying to rationalize how they do that. And I think it's dawning on them it's not as profitable, but it's also not as costly to do as radio.
Right. It's a totally different profit margin. You have to look at it completely differently.
It's a different model.
And that includes the approach to it. Like the approach to selling is completely different than in the radio space. And that's something that they're having to figure out. And the ones who figure that out first are the ones who are going to do well.
And also, what I found interesting is they've always been trying to do it themselves, because they have a little bit of an ego over in radio. They've been trying to do it themselves, and now they're realizing maybe we should go to podcasters who are successful at podcasting and maybe get their help. So I've talked to several people. That was partly what I saw happening as well. So it's been very interesting. That was a big change from this year to past years. And I think we're going to continue to see that evolve and how those two worlds come together. But, they were together. What we did find is everybody drinks and parties the same. So that's one thing we did find. So.
And unfortunately, every conference still plays the music way too loud at said social. If I have to say one negative comment, okay, please, at the next podcasting conference, all the social networking events, we love having a DJ. DJs are great. It's fun. But also remember, a lot of people are there to meet each other and network and talk. We're podcasters. We need to protect our voices. It's not okay on day 2 to have everyone's voices just blown out. Yes.
And I don't know why. It's one turn of a knob, and there's 1,000 people in the room that know how to turn that knob.
And they'll all go, oh, thank God.
Yeah, I know. It was that way back when we did, when we were a podcast movement in Fort Worth. They took us this big open room, had a country band playing, and it was loud as could be. We could not talk. So it's been this way every year. Dave even complained about it on School of Podcasting this week. That was his one complaint. Everybody complains about it every year, and nobody listens. So for PodFest, I'm going to talk to Chris personally, and I'm going to tell him if the music's too loud, I'm going up and turning the knob myself.
And one of my clients, he has an events company. Oh, this really got under his craw. He's like, this is just, he was annoyed on a whole nother level because he's an event planner.
All right. Well, that's so overall, I think that it was a good conference. We learned a little bit more about numbers and
well organized, well executed.
How listeners are.
There were the awards. I do miss the awards ceremony and all of that, the Hall of Fame. That type of stuff.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that right now because I'll get in trouble. So we'll continue on. All right. So one of the other big announcements that happened, we're excited to finally be able to talk about because we're working on it so long, is Jaime and I are on the board of a new organization that was announced at Podcast Movement. It's called the International Podcast Association. And we've been talking about this for a long time, since we met, probably. Years ago.
And I'm so excited that you got the name right, because how many iterations have there been?
Yeah, there have been a lot. There have been a lot in the making of this. But the international, we feel it's time to have an association that represents all people in podcasting, whether you're a host, an editor. We also think it's time because we need a centralized place to offer community support, training, resources, best practices, to keep track of local events and international events, discounts, all the news and industry representation that we're going to need in the future going forward in the form of lobbying when Congress starts to get involved in our business. And that's going to happen. So we just felt it was time that we had an organized voice and an organized place to find information. So we got together with a bunch of our friends who have been professional podcasters, have been doing it for a long time. And we've been meeting for 6 months, right?
Yeah, 9 of us, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
We've been meeting for 6 months to try and put this together and the announcement together, and we did that. What we need is your help. Right now, the only thing you need to know about the association is it's happening and it's going to be a good thing for everybody, but we really need your help. And what we need your help with is to take a survey that we put together to try and identify what the priorities of the association will be at startup. Mm-hmm. And you go to internationalpodcastassociation.org, internationalpodcastassociation.org, take the survey. It'll be open for about a month. And we've had a lot of people take it so far, and the interest has been great from what we've seen so far. So go to internationalpodcastassociation.org, take the survey for us. We really need your help with that because we want to help you be a better podcaster. And we want to help the industry grow. We want to help the number of people who pod fade. We want to decrease that. We really believe in this industry. We're all donating our time to do this. Nobody's making a dime. It's going to be a nonprofit organization. So we really need your help. And then we're going to need your help maybe in the organization and the running of it down the line in committees and things like that. So step one, though, we really need you to take the survey.
And we caught up with one of the fellow members of our committee, our International Podcast Association, Liz Covart. We met up with her right there on the expo floor of Podcast Movement. And she's an award-winning podcaster, guys, with Ben Franklin's World. We both adore her. And we thought there's no one better to tell you a little bit more about what the intention of the association is than her.
Well, I am here with Liz, who is a board member of the IPA, which we just talked about a little bit. And Liz, we wanted to have you on because we needed another voice other than ours, and somebody that actually sounded authoritative. So sound important right now.
This is really appropriate, Glenn, because you and Jaime invited me to investigate the IPA with
We did, didn't we?
Yes. So and we talked about it a few years ago.
Yeah.
Like before it was the IPA, it was just like this idea that maybe there could be an organization that represented the industry of podcasting.
Actually, I think, Liz, we've talked about it every time we've gotten together for the last 4 years.
Something that herds these cats called podcasters.
We've had a lot of fun over those last 4 years, Glenn.
So what do you hope the IPA does for the industry?
You know, I think for me, I think about the things I like about what the American Historical Association does for historians, which is a lot of advocacy. I think that there is a need for a lot of advocacy in podcasting. You know, if someone wants to change a metric or we want potential advertisers, there should be a central organization where people can go that's representative of everyone in podcasting to help make decisions that help companies. Like companies could have focus groups within the organization. People who are just getting started could turn to the organization for how-to and best practices and that sort of thing. So I think there's a need for a reputable organization for the industry that provides high-quality information that you know is accurate, that can really represent the world of podcasting to potential app developers and all sorts of things. And I actually think we're going to see some government intervention in digital media at some point.
Yes.
So we kind of need to organize and unite so we have the advocacy and the organization in place before that happens.
So what is the rollout starting to look like? What do you think is going to be some of the initial steps for the IPA?
I think one of the key things is for people to take our survey at the International Podcast Association.org, because we're trying to there's so many issues we could work on. What are the key issues that keep reappearing for podcasters? Those are, of course, the ones we want to work on first. So that is one thing, is identifying those issues. I mean, behind the scenes, we need to do things like get a website up and going. We need to organize our Kickstarter campaign. And that's a really important campaign for us because we think there's a need. There's other podcasters that think there's a need for the association. But if we don't get enough buy-in from podcasters to do it, then maybe now is not the right time to do it.
This is an association for podcasters by podcasters. And if there isn't podcasters,
right.
Yeah.
You know, so we're at Podcast Movement, which attracts a lot of corporate entities here. And what we're seeing now more than ever, I mean, we've seen a slow influx from the radio side of the industry. And now we're seeing it like gangbusters, like they're ready to really bust through. And the worry is because they look at advertising, sponsorships, how they construct their content, all this stuff. From the high level, it might seem the same, but it's really very, very different. And what I've been fearing is if these guys get in, as many good things as it might do for us, it could also do some bad things because we should be the ones who are really at the forefront of the conversation.
Well, there's some historical precedent for that. I'm a historian. Of course, I have to bring in history. No, but
benfranklinsworld.com.
Yeah. The history of radio, which was one of the first media, of course, took a lot of things from print media. So a lot of the publication, ways you monetize your show, produce your content, build your audience, radio took from that. And TV, of course, built from radio. And now podcasting is like, we invented everything, like the live show. And it's like, no, like they were doing live podcasting in like 1920. There was a show from Chicago. It was a musical show. And they were going around the country soliciting listener support and engagement. So what happened was with radio is it was established by a lot of these independent radio people. You had Frank Conrad in his garage in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, deciding, hey, what happens if I crank on my radio and I put a record album on? I mean, that was the birth of music radio from his garage in Pittsburgh. And over time, especially after World War I, you saw more corporate entities coming into play. Networking, the only way they could network back then was to rent stations and cable wire from AT&T. So they had to pay rent to get a nationwide broadcast system in place, which is why you see content consolidated. And a lot of radio is still based on that media, and podcasts don't have to be that way. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from professional radio people as independent podcasters, and I think there's a lot that professional radio can learn from independent podcasters, because we're working in an old media, but a new media. Right. And I think there's a lot of potential to innovate, and the IPA could be an organization that helps foster that innovation and fosters the knowledge that we are not completely new, we are not completely old, and I'm excited about that.
And because
too.
It's open to anybody, the radio people can join the association too, because they're podcasting, right? So because it's open to everybody, I think it also can help bridge that gap there and start the dialogue between the two.
And it'll also help people, I think, stop wondering whether podcasting is like a fad that is just going to die out. Like, we'll have a professional organization to do it. I think what we're just seeing is we have more ways to access content, that everybody's interested in different stories and different news and different, ideas that drive them to consume media in different ways. And podcasting is just one of those ways.
I've been doing this for 11 years. I hope it's real. Because
if not, that's going to be some conversation with Jennifer.
Liz, what's your website?
My website is benfranklinsworld.com.
And it is worth listening to.
She's award-winning, y'all.
And if you love horses, episode 130, I recreate Paul Revere's ride.
Oh, it was great. It was great.
And I debated whether I needed for that scene a Narragansett pacer or whether I could just use clips. I mean, you even sent me some clips from some horses, and I was like, I need galloping. And I was like, it's kind of breezy. So I really debated over
you actually did. That was probably one of the episodes she debated over the 1 30-second clip of a horse.
But I knew he had to ride into town and stop, so I needed kind of like a gravel stop, and then he'd ride out of town, and then he would need to the hoofs would have to pick up the granite, the gravel. So
Look at
I really
you.
debated that.
Narrative storytelling.
It's in the details
with the horses.
There you go. Thank you so much, Liz.
Thanks, Liz.
And you can find out more information with the press release all about the IPA, which I love to say because y'all know me and beer, but all about the IPA. And I'll have it posted on flintstonemedia.com and on floridapodcastnetwork.com. And I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it because it's pretty much out there everywhere. Like Podcast Business Journal, podcast, everywhere. It's everywhere. Okay. But yeah, try to find the press release. It's pretty cool. Or you can tune into me on September 30th, because I'll also be talking about the International Podcast Association on International Podcast Day. Yes, there's a day for us to celebrate podcasting all over the world. It is a 24-hour live broadcast. And I got asked to do it again. I got asked to do it 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, I spoke with Glenn and Chris Kermitzo, some Danny Pena, and a couple other friends, all about the podcasting scene in Florida. And because it was really starting to grow like gangbusters. And it's only proceeded to get bigger and bigger and better as the years have gone by. But this year, I'm going to be talking about how networks and networking can really help build your podcasting career. So both in-person stuff, like going to conferences like Podcast Movement, Podfest, meetup groups, those different things, or networking, virtually, like having other podcasts on as guests or vice versa, or building an actual podcast network like the Horse Radio Network or the Florida Podcast Network or the Wedding Biz Network. All these different opportunities to get yourself out there through networks and networking can really grow your podcast. So I'll be doing an hour of that. And if it is, my hour is scheduled to be at noon Eastern time on September 30th. And if you want more details, go to flintstonemedia.com/IPD for International Podcast Day.
International Podcast Day is September 30th, and you can help spread the word. You may be asking, what can I do to get involved? It's pretty simple. Head over to internationalpodcastday.com and check the suggestions. Then use hashtag International Podcast Day to join the conversation. You can reach out and connect with other podcasters, listeners, and your favorite podcast hosts. Remember September 30th, International Podcast Day, a day-long celebration of the power of podcasts.
Well, we did have a chance to catch up with some of our friends from Florida while we were at Podcast Movement. We got to sit in the Buzzsprout booth and have some very professional sound.
I know.
We were all using different microphones. We wanted to do a microphone test, but we didn't have time. They kicked us out.
But I got to finally record with the Rodecaster. That was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. You just like the Rodecaster because it's pretty and has nice buttons.
Big
colorful buttons. That's why you like it. So you don't care what it does. It just has pretty colorful buttons. $700 of really colorful buttons. So we had a chance to sit in there in the booth with Jonathan Oakes and also with Robyn Sayles. Jonathan Oakes is a 2019 Trivia Hall of Fame inductee. Yes, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame here recently for his show, Trivial Warfare. So we're going to talk about that.
Yep.
And also Robyn Sayles of her show, Launching Your Success. And she's also part of the St. Pete Podcasters Meetup group. So let's hear what they had to say.
Of course, this is the Florida Podcasting News Show. We have to talk to Florida podcasters. And we're so excited because Robyn and Jonathan are here joining us. And we've been watching both of their careers for quite some time. And we can't wait to catch up. So we're going to start with you, Robyn, our co-keynote speaker from PodFest. We have some voice art that we were really excited we got a few months ago. So tell everybody about, well, first of all, what's your show about? Tell us what you're doing in the space.
Sure. So I work with podcasters on brand messaging, making sure they get the attention of the audience who's already looking for them. And then because I fell in love with working with podcasters in particular, amongst other creatives, I co-founded St. Pete Podcasters with my pal Diane. And so now we meet monthly to just have collaborative and engaging conversations around podcasting. And we're looking to start doing some mini workshops to help people get over the fear of getting into podcasting or expanding their knowledge.
That's awesome. I'm actually the organizer of the Palm Beach Podcasters. And so we need to swap some ideas and stuff because I feel like we can be doing a lot of the same things and join that idea table right up. I think that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So what has your PM experience been like so far?
So amazing. I debuted a new topic at the Ignite sessions on Tuesday night called Female Heroes Need Better Mentors.
Gotcha.
And it came from discovering when looking for an example of a female hero with a great mentor that there weren't any.
I don't know if I consider myself a hero, but my mentor was just awesomely awfully awesome.
Well, when you're doing a presentation, you want to give a visual from pop culture, from entertainment that people instantly recognize.
Yeah.
And I could not find a female hero that people instantly recognize who had a good mentor who would help her complete that hero's journey.
Gotcha.
The only one actually who fit the criteria was Buffy the Vampire Slayer and her mentor Giles.
I love it. Well, it's sometimes you got to tap into fiction.
And that will be the only reference ever to Buffy the Vampire Slayer on this show.
Not if Robyn comes back.
I might bring it back up.
There you go. Yeah, Mr. Trivia over here. I'm sure he knows a lot about random stuff from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So yes, Jonathan Oakes, you are from Jacksonville, representing down here at Podcast Movement.
Damn right.
Yeah, damn right. The man with the trivia. So tell us about your show, what you're doing, and I have a lot to talk to you about.
Wait a minute. Before you do that, congratulations. Congratulations. Hall of Fame for trivia.
Oh,
thank you.
Where did you accept this? Where was the acceptance?
This was in Las Vegas. The event was at the Tropicana.
Oh, awesome.
And your whole team, right?
I flew everybody out, yeah.
Oh, that's so
it was
cool.
a fantastic time. So, yeah, the World Trivia Hall of Fame nominated us. They have a panel that nominates their people, so we joined...
Were you the first podcast?
Oh, yeah, by far.
Wow.
So you have Alex Trebek in there. You have Ken Jennings in there.
Oh, my
We
gosh.
beat James Holzhauer in there. So we got in before he did. So we do Trivial Warfare. We like to, we're the podcast that takes the pub quiz out of the pub and brings it home to you. And we've been doing it for 5 years. And what we've really accomplished is to build a real community around quizzing. So we were able to... we have people who just go to their normal pub quizzes all across the country, and now they get to hang out and meet their Jeopardy heroes and other people they've seen on game shows because those people love our show too. And so they all kind of meet in our community.
Can I just put it on the record that Diane Daniels and I played on his show, and we won? Can I put that on the record?
Yeah.
We beat the Hall of Famer.
That's right. 2 against 1. That was excellent.
With 1,000 horse questions.
Yes.
And also, you have had a Kickstarter out for a daily trivia calendar, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. Tell us about that. That's interesting.
Everyday Q&A 2020. So my friend Katie Sikelski and I put together this trivia calendar. It's a page-a-day thing, so it's one of those where you have a physical calendar and you tear it off, and there'll be a trivia question on the front and the answers on the back. And we reached out to our different audiences and said, hey, if you submit questions to this calendar, we're going to have one day a week where we do listener or audience questions. So people who support us actually have the chance to be in the calendar.
Oh my gosh.
And so, yeah, we
so smart.
Our goal was 10,000 and we got up over 12. And so that's going to be coming out. This weekend, I think, is the close of the backer kit part, which is the end. Once we're done with that, the order goes out and we're going to make it happen.
So Jonathan, you don't have a meetup in Jacksonville. You apparently are the only one that doesn't run a meetup. And
I'm too lazy to run a meetup.
It is a lot of work.
Exactly. So meetups are physical. I'm virtual. I don't even exist.
I got to ask you both, though. We've all been coming to these conferences for a long time. How important is it to be in person at these conferences?
Robyn, do you want to answer first?
Yeah. I'd say for me, it's invaluable. This is my marketing. This is where I do my best research. This is where I build lifelong relationships with the people who are
like us,
like you, who, and I mean, how many years have we known each other now? And we just discovered that we both have a theater background. Like you meet these amazing people who have this incredible depth of knowledge and hidden talents, and we can all benefit and be inspired and learn from that. And so for me, like, how dare I not come to these events? Because I'm clearly going to be missing out if I don't.
Right.
Robyn not only has a theater background, she has an improvisational theater background.
Very specific. There you go.
Yes,
I actually did improv for a whole summer, so I'm in the club too. Well, that's what's great about the conventions. I mean, every single touch point of the industry comes together, and as we've heard just from your story and how you've expanded, people come into podcasting for all kinds of reasons, and you've expanded now, into helping others. And Jonathan, you've expanded into, creating a calendar. Now you're in the Hall of Fame, like all these other crazy things. So there's so many different ways to expand, but coming to a convention is where you get to meet all those touch points. They all come together. So what's it been for you? Yeah.
I think conventions for me, they are, I used to come and get really educated. I had to go to every session.
Yes.
You can't even pretend to go to every session of this thing.
No.
Right? There's 1,000 tracks.
But the first couple that I went to, it was about education, and I really benefited from it. I learned a lot. Now it's two things. It's social, so it's reconnecting with people, building relationships, maintaining relationships, which are really important to me because I have a lot of friends in the space now. But the other thing that happens for me is I get challenged all the time. So Ryan Gray, Dr. Ryan Gray is very good at this. So I tell people what's going on. I tell them what I'm working on and what I'm doing, and everybody's got ideas like, oh, you should try this. Have you thought of that? I know you're saying you can't do that, but why? What is that limiting belief? What is it? Why can't you do this? And I'll say reasons, but then I'll take them home and I'll look at it and it's like, maybe I can if I tweak that, if I move this. And all of a sudden, like last podcast movement, I was challenged on why I don't have more than one show. Well, I was like, my show is really long. I put a lot of work into it, etc. Now I have 3 shows. I have 2 more on the way. And what I did was I created short form shows where I can record them all in an afternoon, get 2 months of content in one afternoon, edit them in one afternoon. And in 2 days' work, I have 2 months of content.
Wow.
That kind of thing I would never have come up with on my own. I got challenged to come up with a way to do it here.
It's amazing.
Conferences is so important. 70% of my advertisers come from in-person trade shows. I would never have gotten them had I not seen them in person. We can't talk about it, but we've had experiences here that would have never happened had we not been here in person across from them. They would have never looked at us before.
It's true.
So I think that it's vitally important. The hallway time here
you get
incredible.
tapped on the shoulder, you get led by the hand, people are and that's what's great about as more you mingle and network, the more you have champions all around you who want to support your brand and what you're doing. I mean, this place is just such a phenomenal ecosystem, these kind of things. So we encourage everybody to come to conventions like Podcast Movement, Podfest, or whatever's industry specific for your type of show, like a trivia, convention or whatever.
I've never been invited back since we beat him. Did you?
I've never been invited on. I don't know what that means.
You know what's great about the hallways here? Once you know a good amount of people, all you have to see is one person who's talking to people you don't know.
Yeah,
and you're about to meet a lot of people you don't know.
Exactly.
That's
right. That's true.
Robyn, what's your show? Where can they find you?
They can find me at launchingyoursuccess.com or stpodcasters.com.
How about you, Jonathan?
They can find me at trivialwarfare.com. We just revamped the website. It's all pretty and nice.
Yeah.
All right.
Love it, yeah.
All right, well, we're going to wrap this thing up so y'all can go back into the halls and keep meeting a whole bunch of new people. So thank you so much for joining us, guys. Have fun in St. Pete and Jacksonville.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, also joining us at Podcast Movement in Orlando was my neighbor to the north, David Guggenheim from Jupiter. And David is also an FPN insider. So I was so excited to see that David was there. And not only was he there, but he also dragged his other friend, David, from San Diego to join in on the Podcast Movement fun. But we got David Guggenheim to join in on our fun, recording a little bit on the show as another Florida podcaster doing awesome things in Jupiter.
Well, we are so excited to have in person one of our FPN insiders in the house,
yes.
David Guggenheim.
Hello.
From Jupiter Farms with the
Jupiter Farms Residents Podcast.
All right, and we are all about local podcasts and local podcasting. So what is the experience been like for you to grow a podcast about Jupiter Farms? That is like hyper local. That's
We're doing it hyper local. We're doing it. I'm actually relatively new to Florida. I've only lived here really. The last podcast.
You ain't the only one.
Yeah, I know. But the last podcast movement was up in Philly. I attended that, went to my house, finished up packing up, and then drove down to Florida.
No way.
Yes,
no way. So where did you come from? Philly or from where were you living before? Florida?
I was living in a little place called Oradell, New Jersey, right outside of Manhattan.
All right, so we don't blame you.
Yeah. I don't know if this makes it better or worse, but I'm originally from Los Angeles.
There you go. There you go. Which is why we see you walk around with your other friend, David, that you brought into the fold of the podcasting industry here. Yeah, he's going to thank you very much later, I'm sure. It's craziness. So what's it like being at Podcast Movement now this year versus in Philly?
Well, Philly was. I come from a radio background. I've been doing
I hate
radio.
your voice, by the way.
Well, this mic is helpful for me. But I come from a radio background of 20 years and also worked for iHeartMedia and also for SiriusXM for about 15 years.
Wow.
So the first podcast movement that I attended was last year, and that was really where I'm like, I'm switching careers from radio into podcasting. I need to meet podcasters. I can't, as a radio person, think I know it all just because I've been doing talk radio for that amount of time. I need to understand the differences and the unique aspects.
It's good for you to have had that perspective.
Yeah, and absolutely was. And it's been a year, and this really is it's nice to come home now with a lot of people I recognize from meeting last year. Creating a lot of podcasts in the interim months with my company, Someone Talk Media, as well. So, which I help people start up and launch their podcasts and do all those sorts of things.
Awesome. So
they're all residents of Jupiter Farms, right?
Mostly one of the fun things about this is I've been really focusing on starting up podcasts that are local. A lot of them are branded small businesses. I'm just like, this is such a great way for people to find out about what you do, but find out that you're a person behind what you do. Mm-hmm. And it's not just, some sort of cold calculated, website.
Right.
It's just telling you everything that you need to know about, whatever their business is.
Right. So in building your show for Jupiter Farms,
yes.
I mean, what subject matter have you focused on? Obviously it's community based, but that can mean a lot of things. Is it events? Is it businesses? What kind of...
Well, our most popular episode was focusing on the history of Jupiter Farms. where we brought in some experts, quote unquote experts from
there were a couple
community.
100-year-olds left.
Yeah, exactly. But just Jupiter Farms is a relatively new place.
Yeah.
It was pretty rural. It's still rural. It's an equestrian community if people aren't aware.
It is.
Glenn, I'm sure you've ridden around a few times. So so people really responded to wanting to know more about where they come from and the history of it. Our last episode, we're a monthly show. Our last episode was focusing on a candidate forum where we brought on all three candidates for a local election that we were having. And I'm like, the only other outlet where you could do this in such a small location is like a candidates night at a local meeting, and maybe you get 50 people if you're lucky to attend this.
Yeah.
And with the podcast, you're able to reach so many more people, and it just gives me such joy as somebody who's relatively new to the community, able to get that information out to so many more people.
Absolutely. And so in establishing your podcast, you decided to choose the company whose booth we're actually sitting at right now.
Yes.
So you host your podcast with Buzzsprout.
Yes, we host it on Buzzsprout. It's been a great platform for us, like honest to goodness. It's the one I like to use, and it's so easy and simple to use. So it's been a great pleasure there, and it's fun to sort of bring it full circle being here in the booth.
There we go. And we're going to talk to them next. So thank you so much, David.
Yeah, thank you guys.
What's the website?
JupiterFarmsResidence.com, and my company is SomeoneTalkMedia.com.
Flintstone Media has been the digital bedrock of several Florida brands and businesses. Serving as a highly resourceful podcast production house, work with a leader in Florida's podcasting industry and add a podcast to your brand's content offerings. From setup through recording and distribution, Jaime will lend her experience producing over 500 episodes and make the process of creating your show simple and easy for you. Visit FlintstoneMedia.com for podcast samples. That's FlintstoneMedia.com.
Well, we can't leave you without just a little bit of network news. And first up, I want to mention somebody who is new to the scene. Mr. Charles Milling is joining Flintstone Media, the parent company of all this madness. He is joining us as a lead producer and engineer, and we're very excited to... Truth be told, Charles Milling is actually the guy who taught me how to edit. So I'm very excited to have him getting into podcast editing because he has a music background. He's been a music producer for a number of years. So it's just a joy and a blessing to meet him. And if you want to learn more about him, just go to FlintstoneMedia.com. You can find out about him right there. And the second bit of news actually is about the oldness in the room. And it's not even about this network. It's about the network that said oldness founded how many years ago? 11 years ago, to be exact. Glenn,
who are you calling old, by the way?
Not you, your network. Not
okay.
you, not you, no, your network. Glenn and the Horse Radio Network and Jen and Jaime and the whole team over there. You guys are celebrating 11 years of HRN. Congratulations.
Thank you. Some of the numbers are crazy.
Okay, true story. On the one of the booth, the Blueberry booth, had these little buttons available that you could pull out and wear on your shirt or lanyard or whatever for however number of episodes you've released or downloads you've had. There weren't enough buttons in the bin to add up to reach the number. Like I couldn't do it.
You should have seen the reaction, because some people that don't know us would ask, how many episodes are you at? And I would say, well, total we're at over 8,000.
Their eyes fall out.
Yeah, they just don't know what to say. They just pretty much walked away. It was like, no, you can't relate. I can't relate. I've done them and I can't relate. So, we've done over 8,000. When we figured it out, it's 6,400 hours of programming. So if you listen 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to all our shows on the Horse Radio Network, it would take you 255 days.
Wow.
To listen to.
Wow. I mean, guys, all I'm hearing is it can be done. So we want to know who's going to commit to the challenge.
Some of the numbers I didn't release to the public, but I can talk about here. So we've had over 50 sponsors since we started. 35 are still with us. We have 35 currently.
We're hoping the other 15 are alive and with us. Generally
some
speaking.
of them are still around. Most of them got bought out. So, they got bought out by other companies or something like that. Yeah. But so, we're very proud of that. And we currently have 30 terrific co-hosts, all pretty much type A women who are worse than Jaime and make my life miserable. So there's that. Apparently, I like strong type A women. I apparently have a type. So
I'll take that as a compliment.
But it's been fun, and we don't plan on quitting anytime soon. So
Well, good, because the podcasting space, especially here in Florida, would be vacuous without you. So don't ever quit. Don't ever quit. Thank you so much. So for the man who's been in charge and been doing this forever, and to the guy, Charles, who's coming on board, it's going to be a great next year. I can see this coming, guys.
Well, we did have some interviews we did at the conference that we did not have time for this week. James and Carrie Ann and Michaela. We're going to get to all of them in the next episode. So look for that there.
You can find more updates on all of this stuff and all of the podcast movement things and the IPA and the IPD and all the stuff. You can find all the things on today's episode and every episode, and sign up to receive the newsletter that usually accompanies this podcast by going to floridapodcastingnews.com. And also, we really love your feedback. And the easiest way to do that is to join us on Facebook in FPN Insiders. It's our closed group where you can, guys, it gets real. You can tell us how you really feel about the show, and no one's going to get mad. You can give us suggestions. You can do Tony did and send us list of suggestions for finding Florida. You can do whatever you feel like is interesting. You can tell us about what you went and did over the weekend. We love to share funny Florida memes, all kinds of stuff. It's basically a whole bunch of Florida man talk in there, to be quite honest with you. And if you also want to send us feedback, another way to do that is to email me at Jaime, Jaime at floridapodcastnetwork.com, or Glenn, GLENN at floridapodcastnetwork.com. And remember, if you want to sign up for that newsletter, go to floridapodcastingnews.com.
Many thanks to this week's sponsor, Flintstone Media, and be sure to visit all the great shows on the Florida Podcast Network, including a brand new episode of the Finding Florida show where Jaime flies high through the air and screams loudly. You can find them at floridapodcastnetwork.com. Until the next time, thanks for hanging out on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.